My name's Mark. I thought I had a pretty good life. Married to Rachel for 8 years, stable job, a cozy home, and a dog named Max. We weren't perfect, but who is? Life had its routine. Work, home, dinners, TV, and occasional date nights when we could escape the grind. Looking back, the cracks were there. I just didn't see them. Or maybe I didn't want to. The first hint came when Rachel was invited to her best friend Jessica's bachelorette party in Miami. They'd been friends since college, so it didn't seem unusual. Rachel was excited, shopping for dresses, booking hair appointments, and texting constantly in a group chat that seemed more important than breathing. She left on a Thursday. The house felt eerily quiet without her. Max kept me company while I binge-watched old sitcoms. I wasn't worried. Why would I be? I trusted her. The first red flag came Friday night. She was weirdly distant during our usual good-night call. The connection was choppy, or at least that's what she claimed. I let it slide. Maybe they were just out somewhere noisy. Saturday passed without much contact. Her texts were short, having fun, love you, and she ignored my calls. By Sunday, something felt off. She didn't text me when she landed back home. By the time she walked through the door that afternoon, she seemed different. Her smile was too forced, her laugh too loud. She talked about the trip like someone reciting a boring travel guide. I hugged her, but something about her felt distant, like she wasn't really there. And that's when my gut twisted. Deep down, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know just how wrong. Life after Rachel's return from the bachelorette party felt off. At first, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. She was still sweet, still affectionate, but it felt hollow, like she was acting from a script. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The first real sign came 2 weeks later when I noticed she was glued to her phone more than usual. Rachel was always active on social media, but now she was more secretive, tilting her screen away when I walked by, lowering her voice during calls, claiming it was just Jessica wedding stuff. One night, Max was restless, barking to go outside at 2 a.m. As I let him out, I noticed a faint glow coming from the living room. There was Rachel, sitting on the couch, whispering into her phone. I cleared my throat. She jumped like she'd been caught committing a crime. "Hey, couldn't sleep," she stammered, clutching the phone. "I was just checking in on Jessica. Wedding stress." "Sure," I said slowly, eyeing her flushed face. She hurried past me back to bed, muttering something about being exhausted. I stood there, heart pounding, unable to shake the gnawing suspicion that something was very, very wrong. The next few weeks were a slow descent into madness. Rachel grew more distant, distracted, even snippy at times. She used to cuddle with me on the couch, but now she claimed she was too tired. Our sex life evaporated. Every night, she'd fall asleep before I could even suggest it, or pretend to. One evening, curiosity got the better of me. While she was in the shower, I picked up her phone, a line I never thought I'd cross. Locked. New passcode. She'd never locked her phone before. My chest tightened. I couldn't shake the creeping dread. Her lies were piling up, but I still didn't have proof. I needed to know for sure. So I did something I'd never done before. I installed a GPS tracker on her car. It felt dirty, but my sanity was hanging by a thread. The first few days were uneventful. Work, errands, nothing suspicious. Then, one Friday night, she told me she was having a girls' night with Jessica. The tracker told a different story. She wasn't at Jessica's house. She was parked outside some cheap motel 2 towns over. I felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath me. My mind raced with possibilities, each more gut-wrenching than the last. And then came the real twist. As I watched the blinking on the screen, her car started moving, heading back toward our house. She was coming home. Rachel's car crept closer on the GPS map as I sat frozen at the kitchen table, gripping my phone like it held the secrets to my collapsing world. The motel address burned in my memory, a seedy, dimly lit place meant for one thing. Max stirred at my feet, sensing my unease. I stroked his fur absently, trying to calm my racing heart. 1,000 thoughts clawed at my mind. Who was she with? How long has this been going on? Does she even love me anymore? The sound of her car tires crunching up the driveway snapped me back to reality. I quickly closed the GPS app and shoved the phone into my pocket, forcing myself to breathe. The front door creaked open. "Hey, babe," Rachel called, her voice annoyingly cheerful. "Maxie, come here, boy." Max hesitated, but eventually wagged his tail and trotted over. I stayed seated, my fingers clenched into fists beneath the table. She walked into the kitchen, still in the dress she'd worn out, tight, black, a little too short. Her makeup was smudged, and her hair was tousled like she'd been busy. "Good night," I asked, forcing a smile. She blinked, caught off guard by my presence. "Oh, you're still up? Couldn't sleep?" She grabbed a water bottle from the fridge, avoiding my gaze. "Girls' night was fun. Jessica's such a mess with the wedding planning." She took a long sip, her eyes flicking toward the clock like she was calculating something. Her whole demeanor screamed guilty. "Glad you had fun," I said slowly, holding her gaze until she shifted uncomfortably. I could have confronted her right then, demanded answers, thrown accusations, but I wasn't ready. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. The next day, I hired a private investigator. It felt extreme, like something out of a trashy detective novel, but I was done playing the trusting husband. I gave the PI all the details, Rachel's car model, her work schedule, even the motel address. He nodded, professional and discreet. "I'll be in touch." The waiting nearly drove me insane. Rachel acted normal, or at least her twisted version of it, kissing me goodbye in the mornings, texting me sweet nothings during the day. It made me sick. 3 days later, the PI called. His voice was grim. "We have something." Part 3, The Unraveling. Rachel's car crept closer on the GPS map as I sat frozen at the kitchen table, gripping my phone like it held the secrets to my collapsing world. The motel address burned in my memory, a seedy, dimly lit place meant for one thing. Max stirred at my feet, sensing my unease. I stroked his fur absently, trying to calm my racing heart. 1,000 thoughts clawed at my mind. Who was she with? How long has this been going on? Does she even love me anymore? The sound of her car tires crunching up the driveway snapped me back to reality. I quickly closed the GPS app and shoved the phone into my pocket, forcing myself to breathe. The front door creaked open. "Hey, babe," Rachel called, her voice annoyingly cheerful. "Maxie, come here, boy." Max hesitated, but eventually wagged his tail and trotted over. I stayed seated, my fingers clenched into fists beneath the table. She walked into the kitchen, still in the dress she'd worn out, tight, black, a little too short. Her makeup was smudged, and her hair was tousled like she'd been busy. "Good night," I asked, forcing a smile. She blinked, caught off guard by my presence. "Oh, you're still up? Couldn't sleep?" She grabbed a water bottle from the fridge, avoiding my gaze. "Girls' night was fun. Jessica's such a mess with the wedding planning." She took a long sip, her eyes flicking toward the clock like she was calculating something. Her whole demeanor screamed guilty. "Glad you had fun," I said slowly, holding her gaze until she shifted uncomfortably. I could have confronted her right then, demanded answers, thrown accusations, but I wasn't ready. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. The next day, I hired a private investigator. It felt extreme, like something out of a trashy detective novel, but I was done playing the trusting husband. I gave the PI all the details, Rachel's car model, her work schedule, even the motel address. He nodded, professional and discreet. "I'll be in touch." The waiting nearly drove me insane. Rachel acted normal, or at least her twisted version of it, kissing me goodbye in the mornings, texting me sweet nothings during the day. It made me sick. 3 days later, the PI called. His voice was grim. "We have something." That evening, he handed me a manila envelope filled with surveillance photos and detailed notes. I opened it with trembling hands. The first photo hit me like a punch to the chest. Rachel, hand in hand with some guy outside the motel. He was tall, built, with that cocky, smug look that made my stomach turn. The next photo was worse. Them kissing, locked in an embrace so intimate it made my skin crawl. I slammed the envelope shut, while rising in my throat. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was truth. The PI watched me carefully. They've met 3 times that I could confirm. Same motel, same routine. I nodded numbly, unable to speak. Do you want me to keep digging? He asked. No, I rasped. I've seen enough. That night, I barely slept. My mind reeled with every worst-case scenario. Her lies, her betrayal. It all twisted into a searing knot of rage and despair. But even through the fog of anger, a plan began to form. Rachel thought she'd gotten away with it. She thought I was blind. But she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. Sleep had been impossible after seeing those pictures. The way she clung to that guy, the smile on her face, my wife's smile. But anger kept me focused. Rachel had built her web of lies, carefully crafted and rehearsed. It was time I played my part too. I decided to wait, to let her think everything was normal while I prepared to blow her world apart. That evening, I made dinner. Rachel's favorite, fettuccine alfredo, with garlic bread and a bottle of red wine. She came home looking surprised but pleased, dropping her purse by the door. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice light. "Thought we could have a nice dinner," I said casually. "We haven't had one in a while." She hesitated, just for a second, before slipping into her usual charming routine. "That's so sweet, babe." We ate, made small talk, even laughed a few times. I was careful, playing the doting husband while watching her every move, every glance, every twitch of her lips. Halfway through the meal, her phone buzzed on the counter. I saw her eyes dart toward it, a flicker of panic quickly masked by a practiced smile. "Mind if I check that?" she asked sweetly, already halfway out of her chair. "Of course." She grabbed the phone, typing furiously while pretending to read some fake work message. The facade was flawless, except I already knew. Later that night, while she was in the shower, I checked the GPS tracker again. Her usual Wednesday meeting was scheduled for the next day. I clenched my jaw, already knowing where she'd be. But this time, I wasn't staying home. The following afternoon, I told my boss I needed to leave early, some made-up excuse about a family emergency. My hands shook with adrenaline as I parked my car 2 streets away from the motel, hidden from view. I waited. Minutes crawled by like hours. Finally, Rachel's car pulled in, followed by his. The same tall, built guy from the photos. He stepped out, looking smug and confident as he strolled toward her. She melted into his arms like she belonged there. "Breathe, Mark." "Not yet." I gritted my teeth and watched as they disappeared into room 214. Their room. I could have stormed in right then, banged on the door, unleashed all the fury boiling inside me, but that would have been too easy. I wanted more than just a confrontation. I wanted destruction. So, I waited another 10 minutes, then calmly walked into the motel's front office. "Hey," I said to the bored-looking clerk behind the desk. "Room 214. That's my wife in there with her boyfriend." His eyes widened. What?" "I'm not here to cause trouble," I said coolly. "Just wondering if your security cameras cover the parking lot." The gears in his head turned. He nodded slowly. They do." "Great. You might want to save that footage. Could come in handy during the divorce." I left before he could respond, my heart pounding with grim satisfaction. Back in my car, I dialed Rachel's best friend Jessica. "Hey, Jess," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just wondering if Rachel's with you right now? She said she had a girls' night." There was a long pause. No, she didn't mention anything to me." I let out a low laugh. "Figured. Thanks." I hung up and stared at the motel door, still shut tight. Rachel thought she'd outsmarted me, but she'd just given me everything I needed. By the time Rachel left the motel that evening, I was long gone, but the damage was already set in motion. I had everything I needed: photos, video footage from the motel, and confirmation that she wasn't at girls' night with Jessica. I wasn't interested in just exposing her. I wanted her to feel the same humiliation she'd inflicted on me. That night, she came home beaming, still riding the high from her secret rendezvous. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, like she wasn't the lying, cheating woman I'd seen wrapped around another man just hours earlier. "How was your day?" she asked, all sweetness. "Same old," I replied, keeping my tone light. You? Oh, busy with work. Her voice didn't even waver. I forced a smile, imagining the look on her face when she realized her entire life was about to implode. The next day, I went into full preparation mode. First, I met with a divorce attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Lisa who specialized in infidelity cases. I laid out everything: the pictures, the surveillance footage, even the motel's front desk recordings. Her eyes widened slightly as she skimmed the files. "This is thorough," she said, impressed. "You're in a strong position. Do you want to file immediately?" "Not yet," I said. "I want her to see it coming." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "I usually recommend a cleaner approach, but your call." Next, I scheduled a meeting with Jessica, Rachel's so-called best friend. I debated whether to involve her, but after her clueless response on the phone, I knew she deserved to know the truth. We met at a local coffee shop. Jessica arrived looking confused but concerned. "Mark? What's going on? Is everything okay with Rachel?" I slid a manila envelope across the table. "You tell me." Her hands trembled as she opened it, flipping through the photos and reports. Her face went pale. "Oh my God, this can't be real." "It's very real," I said coldly. "She's been using you as her cover." Jessica's mouth opened and closed as she struggled for words. I had no idea. I thought she was just busy. Busy screwing another man," I snapped. Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded, swallowing hard. What do you want me to do?" "Nothing," I said firmly. "Just don't cover for her anymore." Jessica nodded, still stunned. The final piece of my plan fell into place that Friday night. Rachel had dinner plans with the girls, her usual cover story. This time, I didn't bother tracking her car. I knew exactly where she'd be. I called a few close friends, people Rachel and I both knew, and invited them over for a surprise gathering to celebrate our anniversary. I played the perfect host, setting out drinks and snacks while pretending everything was perfectly normal. An hour later, Rachel walked through the door with him. They froze in the entryway, their faces draining of color as they saw the room full of familiar faces. Friends, co-workers, even Jessica standing by the fireplace, arms crossed. The silence was deafening. "Rachel," I said smoothly, stepping forward. "You're home late. Didn't expect you to bring company." Her mouth worked soundlessly, panic flashing in her eyes. The guy, her boyfriend, shifted uncomfortably, realizing he'd walked into a trap. I can explain," Rachel stammered. I held up a hand, stopping her cold. "Don't bother." I turned toward the crowd, voice steady and clear. "Everyone, meet Ethan. Apparently, he's been seeing my wife for the past few months." Gasps echoed around the room. Rachel's knees buckled as the full weight of her humiliation hit her. And I just stood there, watching her carefully constructed world collapse. The room fell into stunned silence after I introduced Ethan, the man Rachel had been screwing behind my back. He stood frozen, shifting uncomfortably as if calculating the nearest exit. Rachel's face twisted into something between terror and disbelief. "Mark, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Telling the truth," I replied calmly. "Something you seem to have forgotten how to do." Jessica stepped forward, fire blazing in her eyes. "You used me, lied to me. Every time you said you were with the girls, you were with him." Rachel's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked like a cornered animal, desperate to escape but paralyzed by the realization that she couldn't. I let the weight of the moment sink in before addressing the room again. Months of lies, deception. I have proof, photos, surveillance, motel records. You all know me. You know I wouldn't make this up. Gasps rippled through the room. I saw some people exchange horrified glances while others just stared in stunned silence. Ethan, clearly panicking, raised his hands defensively. "Hey man, I didn't know she was." "Shut up." My voice cut through his excuse like a blade. "You knew exactly what you were doing." He blanched but held his ground, probably realizing he was in too deep to run now. Rachel finally snapped out of her shock. "Mark, please, can we talk about this privately?" I laughed bitterly. "Privately? Like how you kept your little affair private?" "No, Rachel. You made your choices. Now you get to face the consequences. Her eyes filled with tears, real or fake. I couldn't tell anymore. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean for it to. Stop. My voice cracked with suppressed rage. Don't insult me with your pathetic apologies. You didn't mean to destroy our marriage? To humiliate me? She sobbed, shaking her head, but I kept going. You wanted excitement? A thrill? Well, congratulations, you got it. Jessica, still seething, stepped between us. You disgust me, Rachel. I stood up for you, believed in you. And you? You used me as a cover for your filthy little affair. Rachel crumpled under her words, finally realizing she had lost more than just her husband. She'd lost her closest friend. I turned toward Ethan, venom dripping from my words. As for you, I'd leave. Now, before this gets worse. He hesitated, his mouth twitching like he might try to say something clever, but the icy looks from everyone told him he was out of his depth. Without another word, he bolted for the door. Rachel collapsed into a chair, head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I felt nothing but cold, empty satisfaction. Our friends slowly filed out, some pausing to give me sympathetic looks or words of support. Jessica lingered for a moment, placing a gentle hand on my arm. I'm so sorry, Mark. Not your fault, I said quietly, watching as Rachel dissolved into a broken shell of the woman I'd once loved. Jessica left, and finally, it was just the two of us. Rachel lifted her tear-streaked face, eyes red and swollen. Mark, I'm so sorry. I know I've ruined everything. I stared at her, exhausted from rage, heartbreak, and betrayal. You didn't just ruin us, Rachel. You destroyed everything. Our marriage, our trust, even my respect for you. Her sobs deepened. I didn't think. I didn't mean. Stop. Just stop. My voice was hollow, stripped of emotion. I've already filed for divorce. She gasped, visibly recoiling. No. Please, Mark. I'll do anything to fix this. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want. I shook my head slowly. You can't fix what's already shattered. Her hands trembled as she reached for me, but I stepped back. We're done, Rachel. You killed us the moment you walked into that motel. Her face crumpled as she realized there was no coming back. No redemption. No second chance. I walked toward the door, pausing only to deliver my final words. I hope he was worth it. Then I left her, sobbing, broken, and alone. The drive away from that house felt like escaping a burning wreck. My hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, breath coming in shallow gasps as the weight of what I'd just done settled over me. Rachel was out of my life, or soon would be. I'd made sure of that. But cutting her out didn't mean the pain disappeared. It just changed shape. I crashed at my best friend Eric's place that night. He didn't ask too many questions, just handed me a beer and a blanket. Stay as long as you need, man. I nodded, grateful for the simplicity of his support. No pity, no lectures, just a quiet place to fall apart. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind replayed everything, the confrontation, the way Rachel collapsed, her desperate pleas. Part of me felt hollow, like I'd been stripped down to nothing, but another part felt free. The next morning, my phone buzzed with messages, voicemails, apologies from Rachel, desperate, rambling texts. Please, talk to me. I can't believe this is happening. I made a horrible mistake. I'll do anything to fix it. I deleted every single one. By noon, the divorce papers were officially filed. My attorney promised she'd handle everything. I gave her Rachel's work address for the papers to be served, cold, efficient, and public. Later that week, I returned to the house, my house, to pack my things. I half expected Rachel to be there, waiting, begging, but the place was silent. Empty wine bottles littered the kitchen counter, and her keys were tossed carelessly on the dining table. She must have known coming back wouldn't change anything. Max padded up to me, tail wagging, his familiar warmth grounding me in the chaos. Hey, buddy, I whispered, scratching behind his ears. It's just you and me now. I moved room by room, packing clothes, personal files, anything that mattered. I paused at our wedding photo hanging on the wall, the last symbol of a life that no longer existed. I ripped it down and tossed it into the trash. As I loaded the last box into my car, Jessica pulled up in her SUV. She stepped out hesitantly, her expression a mixture of sympathy and regret. "Mark, can we talk?" I sighed, too tired to argue. "Sure." She leaned against her car, avoiding my eyes. "I didn't mean for things to blow up like that. I swear I didn't know." "I know." Her voice trembled. "She's been calling me, begging me to help her talk to you." I clenched my jaw, forcing down the surge of anger. "You're not responsible for her mess." Jessica nodded slowly. She's not doing well, Mark." I bit back a bitter laugh. "Neither am I." Before she left, Jessica reached into her purse and handed me a small box. "I found this at the house when I came by earlier. Thought you might want it." Inside was my wedding ring, tarnished, forgotten. I stared at it for a long moment, memories crashing down like a tidal wave. The promises we'd made. The future we were supposed to have. Without a word, I hurled the ring into the yard, watching it disappear into the grass. Jessica flinched but said nothing. She just nodded and drove away, leaving me alone with the empty house and the shattered pieces of what used to be my life. As the weeks passed, the initial rage burned out, leaving something colder, emptier. Friends reached out cautiously, offering sympathy I couldn't stomach. Eric dragged me out for drinks a few times, but even that felt hollow. Every bar, every conversation felt meaningless. The reality was simple. Rachel was gone, and despite everything, I missed her. One night, while scrolling through old photos, I came across one from our honeymoon. A candid shot of Rachel laughing by the ocean, her eyes full of joy. The ache in my chest hit like a punch. For all her lies, for all the pain she'd caused, I still loved who she used to be. But that person was gone, and so was I. Weeks turned into months. The divorce process dragged on, slowed by Rachel's endless attempts to stall, pleading for reconciliation through lawyers, friends, even letters left on my car windshield. I ignored them all. The damage was done. But moving forward wasn't as simple as signing papers or tossing a wedding ring into the yard. The memories still clung like smoke after a house fire, faint but impossible to escape. One rainy Saturday, I finally returned to the house. The sale was set to close, and I needed to clear out the last of my things. I wasn't prepared for how much the place still felt like her. The empty living room echoed with memories. Movie nights on the couch, late-night arguments over stupid things, mornings when I'd catch her dancing in the kitchen while making pancakes. Max padded behind me, sensing my unease. His gentle presence was the only thing keeping me from bolting. I found an old box in the back of the hall closet, our memories. Photos, cards, ticket stubs from concerts we'd loved. Things I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Until now. As I sifted through the contents, I found something unexpected. A leather-bound journal. Rachel's handwriting looped across the cover. "For us." My chest tightened. I'd forgotten about it. She'd bought it on our first anniversary, saying we should write down memories, hopes, and plans for the future. I hadn't seen it in years. I hesitated, heart pounding, before flipping it open. The first pages were full of love and warmth, entries from both of us in those early, blissful years. Silly anecdotes, dreams about the future, promises of forever. Then the tone shifted. Rachel's entries became solitary, confused, lonely. "Mark works late so much now. I miss how things used to be. Why can't we talk anymore? Everything feels distant. Am I still enough for him?" My breath hitched. I'd never realized she'd felt so alone, that we were crumbling long before her betrayal. But then came the entry that shattered me. "I made a mistake. It was supposed to be harmless, but now I can't undo it. I wish I could take it all back." I closed the journal with shaking hands, the past pressing down on me like a physical weight. It was too late for regrets, for both of us. Rachel's choices were her own, but I couldn't deny my part in what we'd become. The endless work hours, the emotional distance, the way I'd stopped seeing her long before she stopped being mine. Later that night, back at Eric's place, I sat in the dark with Max curled up beside me, replaying memories I couldn't shut out. Rachel had broken us. But maybe we'd been broken long before she walked into that motel. I thought about calling her, about finally hearing her side, her real side. But some wounds shouldn't be reopened. I grabbed my phone and typed a message, fingers hovering over the screen. I read the journal. I deleted it. I'm sorry too. Delete it again. In the end, I typed 2 simple words. Goodbye, Rachel. And for the first time, I meant it. Letting go of Rachel was supposed to bring peace, or at least closure, but all I felt was emptiness. Life moved forward, but I didn't. Every day felt like a quiet, suffocating routine. Wake up, work, walk Max, sleep, repeat. Eric tried pulling me out of my shell, inviting me to poker nights, barbecues, even setting me up on a few dates. But I couldn't connect with anyone. Every laugh, every glance felt shallow, fake. They weren't her. One night after work, I found myself parked outside the old house, the one I'd sold months ago. I didn't even realize I'd driven there until Max barked from the back seat, snapping me out of my haze. The porch light was on, but the place looked different. Someone else's life was unfolding behind those windows now. A family with young kids, their silhouettes flickering against the curtains. They looked happy, whole. I wondered if Rachel ever drove by too. If she ever felt the same hollow ache I did. A few days later, Jessica called. We hadn't spoken since that awful night months ago. Her voice was cautious but warm. Mark, hey. It's been a while. Yeah. My throat tightened. Listen, I ran into Rachel last week, she said carefully. She asked about you. I stayed silent, heart pounding. She's not doing great, Jessica continued. I thought you should know. I hated how much those words affected me. I wanted to pretend I didn't care, that Rachel's life no longer mattered. But deep down, it did. Against my better judgment, I asked, what did she say? Jessica hesitated. She's been struggling, drinking a lot, lost her job. A painful, involuntary pang hit my chest. Rachel had always been fiercely independent, someone who never needed saving. Hearing she was spiraling felt like reopening an old wound. Thanks for letting me know, I muttered, already regretting asking. Jessica paused, then added softly, I think she still loves you, Mark. I hung up without responding. That night, sleep refused to come. Memories twisted through my mind. Rachel's smile, her laugh, her broken sobs during our final confrontation. I couldn't shake the image of her alone, shattered by the mess she'd created. The mess we'd both created. The next morning, I woke up with one thought pounding through my head. I needed to see her. I found her the way Jessica described, living in a rundown apartment on the edge of town. The building was old, worn, and dimly lit. Not the life Rachel was supposed to have. I stood outside her door for what felt like an eternity, rehearsing what I might say, or if I should even be there at all. Before I could second-guess myself, the door creaked open. Rachel stood there, barefoot and pale, wearing a worn sweatshirt and faded jeans. Her eyes widened when she saw me, haunted, uncertain. Mark? Her voice cracked like she couldn't believe I was real. I swallowed hard. Can we talk? She hesitated, then nodded slowly, stepping aside. The apartment was small and cluttered, stacks of unopened mail, takeout containers on the counter. A life in ruins. We sat in strained silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken history. Finally, she whispered, Why are you here? I exhaled, trying to steady my thoughts. Jessica told me about everything. I needed to see you. Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. You shouldn't have come. Maybe not, I admitted. But I couldn't stop thinking about you. Rachel broke down, covering her face with trembling hands. I'm so sorry, Mark, for everything. You have no idea how much I hate myself for what I did, for what I lost. Her words hit like a hammer to the chest. I wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the betrayal, but seeing her now, so broken, so human, it gutted me. I reached out without thinking, gently taking her hand. She gasped but didn't pull away. I'm not here to hate you, I said quietly. I needed to know if you were okay. She shook her head slowly, tears streaming down her face. I'm not. I haven't been since you left. For the first time, I saw the truth beneath the lies and mistakes. A woman who had loved me once, and maybe still did. But love wasn't enough to undo the past. Rachel, I don't know what this means, or where we go from here. My voice cracked, raw with emotion. Me neither, she whispered. But thank you for still caring. I squeezed her hand gently, letting her know she wasn't alone. Not tonight, at least. And for the first time in what felt like forever, neither was I. Rachel and I sat in silence, fingers still loosely intertwined. A fragile connection neither of us dared to break. Her breathing slowed, her trembling eased, but the ache in her eyes remained. I should have let go, walked away, but I didn't. I didn't think I'd ever see you again, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't think I'd come back. Her lips trembled as she met my gaze. Why now? I struggled to find the answer myself. Why did I show up after all this time? Why couldn't I just move on? Because I needed to know if you were okay, I said quietly. And because I couldn't forget you. Her eyes shimmered with fresh tears. I thought about calling you so many times. Why didn't you? She swallowed hard. I didn't deserve to. I wanted to argue, but she wasn't wrong. Her betrayal had shattered me, wrecked my life. But seeing her now, this version of Rachel, reminded me of something deeper, something I hadn't let go. I'm not here to blame you, I said softly. We both made mistakes. Her breath hitched. You didn't deserve what I did to you. I've hated myself every day since. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, just sat there, tangled in memories both beautiful and brutal. Finally, Rachel wiped her face and squared her shoulders, as if bracing for the inevitable. So, what happens now? I exhaled slowly. I don't know. Honest. Raw. True. She nodded, accepting the uncertainty hanging between us. I never stopped loving you, Mark, even when I didn't deserve you. Her words hit harder than any argument, any apology. They reached into the fractured parts of me I'd spent months trying to bury. I don't know if we can fix this, I admitted, voice cracking. I don't even know if we should. Rachel flinched, but didn't look away. I know. I don't expect anything. I needed you to know that I never stopped caring. Her vulnerability left me breathless. I'd spent so long hating her, blaming her. But here she was, real, raw, broken, and still Rachel. Without thinking, I reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. She leaned into my touch, eyes closing for just a second too long. Mark, she whispered. The question in her voice was so familiar, so dangerous. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. My hand lingered, cupping her face as she opened her eyes, pleading, hopeful, afraid. We were standing on the edge of something, a precipice neither of us understood. Rachel, I'm still angry, still hurt. My voice cracked with emotion. But I can't pretend I don't still feel something. A shuddering breath escaped her lips. I don't deserve you. Maybe not, I whispered, heart pounding, but maybe this isn't about deserving. In that moment, the past didn't matter. Not the lies, the betrayal, or the shattered memories. Just us. For the first time in forever, I let myself feel again. Rachel's breath hitched as I cupped her face, the space between us charged with unspoken words. Memories, beautiful and bitter, flooded my mind. My heart screamed to pull her closer, but my soul still bled from her betrayal. I don't know what this is, I whispered, or what it means. Rachel's fingers grazed my wrist, trembling but sure. I don't either, but I still what? Still loved me? Still regretted losing me? Still wanted to fix what couldn't be repaired? Before she could finish, I pulled back, breaking the fragile connection. We can't, not like this. Her face crumpled, and for a second, I hated myself for pulling her close, for pulling away, for everything. Rachel wiped her face with trembling fingers. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. It's not your fault. My voice came out rough, strained. We We're not ready. She nodded slowly, swallowing her hurt. I get it. But the way her voice cracked told me she didn't. I moved toward the door, my mind torn between leaving and staying, between anger and something else. Mark, she whispered, stopping me. Do you hate me? The question shattered me. No, I admitted, voice breaking. I hate what you did, but I could never hate you. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I wish I could take it all back, undo everything. We can't. I hated the finality of those words. We can only figure out what comes next. Rachel nodded, though she looked like she might fall apart at any second. I don't expect anything from you. I just needed you to know I'm still here. The raw vulnerability in her voice twisted something deep inside me. I know, I said quietly, but I don't know where here is anymore. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap. Max was waiting patiently by the car, his tail wagging gently. Always steady, always there. I leaned against the driver's side door, staring up at the dark sky, lungs burning with emotions I couldn't sort through. Rachel was still Rachel, the woman I'd loved, hated, missed, and couldn't forget. But love wasn't a cure. It wouldn't erase what she'd done or undo the scars she'd left behind. The car door opened, and I climbed in, Max resting his head on my lap as if sensing my turmoil. As I drove away from her apartment, my chest ached, not with anger, but something deeper. Hope, fear, longing. Maybe Rachel and I were beyond repair, or maybe we were something broken that still mattered. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I couldn't ignore the part of me that still felt. I pulled over at a quiet overlook, staring at the city lights shimmering in the distance. My phone buzzed, a message from Rachel. Thank you for seeing me. For everything. I typed back, fingers hovering over the screen. I'm still trying to figure out what everything means. And for the first time, I hit send. After that message, the air between Rachel and me changed. Not quite forgiveness, not quite closure, just something. Days passed without another text from her, leaving me in a restless haze. I couldn't decide if I was relieved or disappointed. Seeing her again had awakened things I thought I'd buried. Love, anger, regret, longing. Max and I took long walks, his steady presence grounding me when my mind spiraled into old memories. Each quiet night felt heavier than the last, pressing down like unfinished business. And then, she called. Mark. Rachel's voice trembled on the other end, uncertain but determined. I swallowed hard. Hey, I've been thinking about what you said, about figuring out what comes next. The words hung between us, fragile and dangerous. Me too, I admitted, surprising myself. A shaky breath escaped her. Can we meet? Just to talk? Every instinct screamed no, to protect myself, to keep the walls intact. But my heart, it wasn't ready to let go. Okay, I said softly. We met at a quiet park near the old house. The place felt suspended in time, unchanged, familiar, yet completely different. Rachel was already there when I arrived, sitting on a weathered bench beneath an ancient oak tree. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, but she stayed seated, uncertain. I sat down beside her, leaving just enough space for safety, but not too much. I didn't know if you'd come, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Neither did I. She nodded slowly, hands twisting nervously in her lap. I'm glad you did. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rustling leaves and distant sounds of children playing. For once, words felt unnecessary. Finally, Rachel spoke, her voice steady but raw. I've spent so much time thinking about everything. How I hurt you. How much I ruined. My chest tightened, old wounds stirring. It wasn't just you, Rachel. We both fell apart. Her eyes filled with tears, but she held my gaze. I was selfish. Stupid. I don't know what I thought. I clenched my fists, forcing down the familiar surge of pain. You thought I'd never find out? Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she looked ready to break. I thought you didn't care anymore, that we were already over. Silence. Heavy, painful truth. I never stopped caring, I whispered, voice thick. That was the worst part. Rachel's shoulders sagged as if the weight of that truth crushed her. I hate what I did, hate who I became. I nodded slowly, feeling the ache of memories we couldn't escape. I hated you too for a long time. Her face crumpled, and I hated myself for saying it, but I couldn't lie. Not now. I hate that I still feel something, I confessed, voice trembling. Even after everything. Rachel reached for my hand, hesitant but hopeful. I never stopped feeling it either. For the first time, I didn't pull away. The past still loomed, dark and sharp. But in that moment, it felt just a little bit farther away. We sat there, fingers intertwined. Two broken people, still holding on. Rachel's hand felt fragile in mine, trembling like she was afraid I'd let go. I wasn't sure why I didn't. Maybe I was just tired of fighting what still lingered between us. The park felt timeless, wrapped in quiet stillness, like the universe was holding its breath, waiting for one of us to break the silence. "It's strange being here," Rachel whispered, her thumb tracing gentle circles on my skin. "I used to come here after everything happened." Her voice cracked, thick with emotion. "I'd sit on this bench, hoping maybe you'd show up." The ache in her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I'd imagined her moving on, living a new life far from the wreckage we'd created. I never considered she might have been stuck in the ruins, just like me. "Why didn't you ever call?" I asked, my voice rough. Rachel laughed bitterly, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Would you have answered?" I couldn't lie. "Probably not." She nodded, shoulders sagging. "I didn't think so, but I still hoped." We sat in heavy silence, memories swirling around us like restless ghosts. I thought of our late-night talks on that very bench, planning futures that no longer existed. "I used to think, if I could just go back," Rachel whispered, "to before I messed everything up, maybe we could have made it." Her words twisted something deep inside me. Regret. Asterisk, asterisk, mine and hers. Asterisk, asterisk, woven so tightly together it was impossible to separate. "We can't go back," I said quietly. "But maybe we can figure out what comes next." Rachel's breath hitched as she met my gaze, hope flickering in her tear-filled eyes. "Do you mean that?" I didn't know what I meant, but I nodded. "I'm tired of pretending I don't still care." Her fingers tightened around mine. "I never stopped loving you, Mark, even when I didn't deserve to." I let out a shaky breath, emotions crashing over me. "I'm not promising anything, Rachel, but maybe we could try." Her face crumpled with relief, a soft sob escaping her lips. "I don't need promises, just a chance." We stayed on that bench until the sun dipped below the trees, casting golden light over the park. For the first time in what felt like forever, the past felt lighter. Maybe we couldn't fix what was broken, but maybe, just maybe, we didn't have to. Rachel and I left the park as twilight settled over the quiet streets, walking side by side in uncertain silence. Her fingers brushed mine but didn't linger, like she was too scared to hold on again. I couldn't blame her. I was scared too. "Can I walk you home?" I asked softly, half expecting her to say no. Her eyes widened, surprised but hopeful. "I'd like that." We wandered toward her apartment, Max trotting ahead like nothing had changed. Maybe, to him, nothing had. He still wagged his tail when Rachel smiled, still leaned against her like she'd never left. If only it were that simple. When we reached her building, she hesitated at the front steps, searching my face for something. For permission, for reassurance, for hope. "Do you want to come up?" she whispered, voice unsteady. I hesitated. Everything could fall apart again. But instead of answering, I nodded. Her apartment was the same as before. Small, cluttered, but warm. There were signs of her struggles, bills stacked on the counter, a frayed blanket draped over the couch, but also life. A forgotten book on the armrest. A framed picture of Max from happier times. Rachel hovered awkwardly, wringing her hands. "I wasn't expecting company." "It's fine," I said gently. "I'm not here to judge." She let out a shaky laugh. "Feels like I've been judged for so long. I forgot what it's like to just be." We settled on the couch, Max curling up between us like a silent guardian. Rachel fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, avoiding my gaze. I'm still a mess, she admitted. I'm trying, but it's hard. I know. Her eyes shimmered. I don't expect you to fix me or forgive me. I miss you, Mark. Her confession hit like a tidal wave, raw and unfiltered. For months, I'd been drowning in anger, in loss. But now, I just missed her too. I miss you too, I whispered, voice thick. Even when I hated you, I still missed you. Rachel let out a choked sob, covering her face with trembling hands. Before I could think, I reached out, pulling her into my arms. She collapsed against me, sobbing softly as I held her. No words needed. The weight of our shared past crushed down, but for the first time, it didn't break us. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. When Rachel finally pulled back, her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes burned with something new, determination. I'm not asking for everything, she whispered. Just a chance to be in your life again, however you'll let me. My throat tightened, old walls threatening to rise, but I forced them down. Maybe it was time. I can't promise we'll be okay, I admitted, but I'm willing to try. Her breath hitched, hope flickering in her expression. That's all I need. I brushed a tear from her cheek, my hand lingering just long enough to remind her. I was still here. For the first time in forever. I believed we might make it. Rachel and I stayed on that worn-out couch, tangled in emotions too complex for words. Her head rested against my chest, her breathing steady for the first time in what felt like forever. I stroked her hair absently, still reeling from everything we'd been through. The lies, the hurt, the loss, and now, somehow, this fragile beginning. Are you sure about this? She whispered, her voice trembling. I hesitated, not because I wasn't sure, but because I was. We can't undo the past, I said quietly, but maybe we can build something new. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't from regret. They were from hope. We talked for hours, sharing things we'd buried for too long. Rachel told me about her struggles, the drinking, losing her job, and the nights spent alone in an apartment that felt like a prison. I thought I'd lost myself, she confessed. And you. I never thought you'd even look at me again. Her vulnerability shattered me. I tried to hate you, but I couldn't. Her fingers tightened around mine. I never stopped loving you, even when I didn't deserve it. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, something inside me felt lighter. We weren't healed. We weren't whole, but we were still standing. The days that followed were cautious, tentative, small steps toward something new. We took walks with Max, shared quiet dinners, and learned how to be us again. Rachel got a new job, part-time at first, but enough to remind her that she still mattered, that she still had something to offer the world. One evening, we visited the park where everything had started and ended. Rachel paused beneath the old oak tree, running her fingers over the worn bench where we'd sat that first night. It feels different now, she said softly. Like, maybe we're supposed to be here. I nodded, pulling her into my arms. Maybe we were always meant to find our way back. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, painfully, we rebuilt. There were bad days, days when the past clawed its way back, sharp and relentless. But for every step backward, we took two forward. One quiet evening, as we sat by the fireplace with Max curled at our feet, Rachel reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and familiar, my old wedding ring. I kept it, she whispered, voice trembling. I wasn't ready to let go, even when I thought you were gone. My chest tightened as I took the ring, the cool metal warm against my palm, a symbol of what was and what could be. I'm not asking for promises, she said, her eyes shining. Just a future. Without a word, I slid the ring onto my finger, where it belonged, not as a symbol of the past, but as a promise for whatever came next. Rachel's breath hitched as she threw her arms around me, holding on like she never intended to let go again. And for the first time, neither did I. We weren't perfect. We were messy, broken, but still standing, still trying, still us.